Tough to follow. Let me just start this talk by saying that as far as we know today, and despite plenty of evidence to the contrary, human beings are the smartest, most dominant species in the universe. Let me just leave that there for a moment. Now, I started coding back when I was 13. I was very lucky. I had a parent, relative, grandfather who was very into computers. He had some of the very first personal computers. I don't know if anyone remember those. I'm going back to like 1982, 1983. Little box like this. It was the size of a paperback book, and it had these little tactile keyboard, stickers on it, and I think it had 4K RAM. You could expand it to 8. It was pretty awesome. But back in those days, it truly required brute force and feats of like superhuman strength to get a computer to do anything, really including like just adding a couple of numbers together. The computer would start up, there would be nothing on it. You'd have to load it from a cassette if you had, were lucky enough to have money to buy a cassette recorder. You would load that up, and then you would hopefully have saved what you worked on prior. You'd spend about 30 minutes, and then it would type out, "Hello world." Fast forward just, really not that far, and we started seeing computers doing some pretty amazing things. But even 20 years ago, we didn't see computers doing things in an automated way. Most software, if you wanted it to do anything, was interactive. You had to trigger it. Or maybe there were certain conditions under which it would like be enabled or do its job, like perform some function for us. So it wasn't that long ago. And even today, with all of our advances, when I think about autonomous software, I don't like the term artificial intelligence because we have been dealing with autonomous software for decades. And I want to talk about the backstory because I think it's important in terms of where we're going. But autonomous software has been with us for a long time, but it's still, even today, despite all of the marketing that's here and in other industries, most software today requires some kind of input, some kind of trigger, and some conditions under which it will operate effectively. And we'll talk about quality in software a little bit too, because I think that's a real major issue. Now, despite the trend where we think we may be going, I think the real question is, are we ready for a world that operates on autonomous software? Imagine a world where everything you do, and I'm thinking like Matrix type conditions. Maybe that's not today, although we're probably halfway there. We think about the things that we need to do and the amount of digital exhaust that we generate and how we interact with society, how we communicate, how we entertain ourselves, how we shop, how we eat, how we travel. I mean, every one of these things, essentially you're interacting with some type of semi-autonomous software. But imagine a world where that autonomous software can't be turned off. I want to talk about some of the conditions and my concerns. I think there's a lot of hype, particularly in cybersecurity, around artificial intelligence, but I think there are some risks that we haven't really addressed in any material way, and some of them are caused by things that you may not be thinking about. So I think it's important to talk about where we came from and how we got to where we are to talk about where we're going. So let's go back to the 1950s. This is Arthur Samuel. And Arthur Samuel loved playing checkers. And so he wrote a program so he could play against the computer. And he would play the computer and he would win. He would play, he would win. He played, he would win. And that's because the computer only knew what a legal move was. But Arthur Samuels knew something else. Arthur Samuels knew strategy. And so he wrote a little subprogram, and all it did was run in the background, and it would analyze every board and predict the likelihood of a win based on the different board conditions. And he'd let that run. And then he'd go back and he'd play the computer. And he won. And he played, and he won. And he played, and he won. And then Arthur Samuel left the computer to play itself. Computer plays itself, generates more data. generates more data, it improves the accuracy of its predictions. Then Arthur Samuels goes back and plays the computer, and he loses. He plays and he loses. He plays and he loses. Arthur Samuel had created a machine that surpassed his own skill in a task that he had taught. This was the birth of autonomous software. And even going back to World War II, the early 40s, we were using software, not the kind that we think about today, more machine language and other low-level programming languages to do work that we really couldn't do as human beings to produce amazing outcomes. So in World War II, everyone knows the B-29, right? Sort of one of the superstars in the sky. The B-29 could actually be equipped with 12 .50 caliber machine guns. However, we could not equip the plane with 12 human beings to run that. So we came up with a machine that had software, that was autonomous. And the way it worked was the gunner would aim one of the machine guns, and based on some other targeting mechanisms and mechanical systems, the plane could aim the other 11, including all sorts of math around wind shear and ballistics and angles and things like that. So we had computers working for us in World War II, even before we really were even talking about computers, and to amazing effect. Fast forward a couple of decades, I do remember seeing these when I was starting to drive. We had these speed cameras, right? So we had essentially built these machines and put software in them where they could replace some of the work that we were doing as human beings that we considered low value, like writing speeding tickets. And it did this autonomously, despite the fact that the driver may not be in the car. So this was around the time where software automation and autonomous software started to take a bit of a turn, because we were driven by something else, not efficiencies, not accuracy, not necessarily completeness, or even an outcome that we would all sort of agree was for the social or better good, but rather economics and profit and capitalism. This is when we started to see it turn a little bit, because the driver or the owner, the registered owner of the car, would get a ticket even if they were not in the vehicle. And that was an issue. We see fewer speed cameras these days because they just really were unable to make those things work. You may see them come back with facial recognition and things like that. But the cracks in autonomous software started appearing really in the 70s, when we started putting computers in a lot of these different mechanical devices. Fast forward as close as 2016, Microsoft came out with their first AI-based chatbot. And the goal was to reduce the work and the workload in support cases on their help desk and support requests for some of their common platforms and applications. They called it Tay. Anybody remember this? So Tay was around for a little while. Unfortunately, as we're starting to see some of these fissures, Tay was trained on the only large language model that was available at the time. And we called it the internet. And as we know, the internet in 2016 was maybe a little bit astray of its original intended goals, right? Which was education and communication and enlightenment, right? So by 2016, the internet had become a bit of a suspicious place, at best, I would suggest. And as a result, it produced some unexpected outcomes. I was expecting a few more chuckles there. That's Hitler. Did nothing wrong. Okay. Capitalism started to continue to creep into autonomous software as well. This is an example of a grocery store that thought they could monetize the shopping habits of their patrons. And in this case, knowing what was in the basket and what the shopper had just bought, now the grocery store could conveniently and creatively provide recipes to these shoppers. Unfortunately, that didn't work out so well. And these recipes that were My favorite, my favorite was the Oreo vegetable stir fry.
Oh.
It sounds delicious to me right about now. I skip lunch. So when customers began experimenting and seeing these things, right, we started to again start to question the efficacy of some of these tools. But I think right around now, the question started to move towards this question that I started this talk with, which is, are we really ready for this? Is this something that we want as a populace, as a society, as a species, right? And then 2018-ish, right, really sort of when we started living with Uber and other ride-sharing programs, it took a real turn for the worse, almost sinister. So when big tech and capitalism got involved with autonomous software, we started to see some things where organizations were intentionally misleading or possibly outright lying, even though you may have agreed to it, and deceptive practices around services that we were providing that you could only get through them, or you could only get through big tech. So Uber's a great example. So you may not know this, but when you start up Uber and you see a bunch of cars and drivers that are sort of ready for you, you select your driver, does a little wonky thinking and then shifting, and then it may switch around, the car does a circle, and that's because the driver you selected never existed in the first place. Because what you agreed to when you downloaded the application and created an account is not a list of drivers that are available to take you from A to Z. You agreed to an experience. Up to, I think, 40% of all of the drivers that you will see in the Uber app are fake. And they are generated by Uber, and that's because you agreed to an experience, not reality. Now, what do you think happens when drivers get in their car and they're ready to make some cash after their day job, and they start up the app? What do you think they see? They see a pile of potential riders. They might scroll through, oh, I'll take that one, just like the Door Dashers and everyone else, kind of like cherry picking the best rides. And oftentimes, the rider that they select disappears and switches to something else. And that's because the drivers also agreed to an experience. Those are not real riders, and you have no recourse because the terms and conditions are covered. Now, we're seeing this in lots of other places, right, too. So X, Twitter, when Elon took over, it was estimated roughly 60% of all content generated on Twitter was generated by a bot. Many with, right, seditious intent. And I'll talk a little bit more about influence and the problem around that. But honestly, when we think about big tech in this abstract layer between us and reality, it's becoming thicker and more opaque because we have no visibility into what's happening in these algorithms. This is autonomous software. And then in 2018, it really hit rock bottom because in 2018, I believe September of 2018, a computer first killed a human being. It's not the only one, it was just the first one. It was in San Francisco, September of San Francisco. A Tesla was in self or autopilot mode, came to an intersection where it had some complex conditions, and it ended up running over a 30-year-old or 32-year-old woman, killed her. Now, obviously a big deal, because people get killed by cars all the time, and poor drivers and drunk drivers and distracted drivers. But this was the first time that a computer had killed someone. So we went back, and every Tesla, you may know this, has a black box. All of the programming, telemetry, and signaling and logic is in there, and it's tracked, and it's recorded in an immutable way, of course. It went through the black box just like they would with an airplane that crashed. And they went line by line to figure out and look at and evaluate the decisions that the Tesla had made. And as it turns out, it was not a defect in the code. The computer evaluated each one of its options, and it decided that the best option was to run her over. Now, it's happened a few times. So since 2018, September, 42 people have been killed by Teslas. And I'm not talking people who are driving an autopilot that go off the road because they're, watching a movie, but individuals who have been killed by a Tesla, being hit by a Tesla. And This data is at least a year old. It's probably more than this at this point. I don't know what the number actually is. But we're now dealing with situations where autonomous software is and has become a new species. We are dealing with a consciousness that makes its own decisions, sometimes to the detriment of the species that created it. I go back to Arthur Samuel in the 1950s. I don't think he could have possibly imagined that someday a few lines of code that played checkers could one day kill a human being. Now it gets a little trickier. Google invented a technology called duplex. It was their version of Microsoft Tay, and it was designed to handle support requests and interact with human beings in a realistic, lifelike way, and thus introducing yet another risk around autonomous software, which I will come back to. But it was pretty amazing. Have a listen.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second.
Apologies for the audio.
Sure, what time are you looking for? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like, what service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now? Okay, we have it 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks, great. Have a great day, bye.
So, pretty amazing. And actually, if I wasn't showing the video, you probably wouldn't have known which voice was autonomous software. Now, what happened was something that was maybe a little bit unexpected. Google shut the project down, not because it didn't work well, but because it worked too well. And it started cannibalizing revenue. But more importantly, when we think about what Google does today, whether it's from tracking your browser history to search results, there's something far more powerful than economics and profit that Google and other big tech are after. Influence. If you can control the decision making of the human beings that you interact with, there's virtually nothing you can't do. I want to come back to why this is truly important, but duplex worked too well. And Google said, this is compromising our strategy in the future of this organization. Take it down. Now, as recently as a few weeks ago, I saw this and then I dug in a little bit, but did you know that people are using these tools to essentially obliterate entire industries, right? So 100 million songs, that's equivalent to every single song on Spotify. They generated this in a couple of months, turned up a service, and now people can also go and create their own music using autonomous software, give it a couple of preferences, and it will generate a whole library of music for you. Now, maybe listeners are okay with it today, although I did check the stuff out. It's a lot of ambient noise, but I'm not sure how musicians feel about it. Oh wait, no, I am sure.
I don't have much to say about it. It's computers. It has nothing to do with music. It's, it can't destroy a hotel room. It can't throw a TV off the 5th floor into the pool and get right in the middle. When AI knows how to destroy a hotel room, then I'll pay attention to it.
I mean, thank God for Joe Walsh. He's got it all figured out. But it's not just music, it's other creative forms. So writing books at one point, and I think this was not that long ago, maybe 9 months, 19 of the top 20 books on Amazon were not just generated through large language models and ChatGPT, but they were nonsense. So they weren't normal stories. If you read through them, it was like you couldn't understand the titles, and the title didn't match the content, anyway. But it didn't matter, because at that point, Amazon, which is also just a bunch of autonomous software, was receiving an input, right? And that feedback loop created a list that was just purely nonsense. I'm not sure if we knew to expect this, but it happened. The question is this what we want? Right? Do we want music that is not created by human beings? I would argue, as a recovering musician, that part of the definition of music is that it is a human creative experience and event and pursuit, many things. So if we have essentially destroyed these things with a computer, I'm not sure that's what we anticipated or really what we want. So what does all of this have to do with cybersecurity? Well, there are some direct correlations to this.
Let's get started by trying to describe computer security in a single word.
Piece of
Maybe we can watch your language. I'll write down frustrating. Write down language. And what can I write down language?
slow dumpster.
Yes.
Big bag.
Bag pop up. That's 3 words.
If you say it fast, it's 1 word.
No, seriously. No, it's true. You're all here because cybersecurity sucks. I know it. But we figured out a couple of things in cybersecurity. So there's plenty of AI marketing and buzz and hype and hysteria here in our industry, and I feel like cybersecurity, more than most, just has really been drawn to the potential futures and benefits of this thing. But we've had difficulty in doing a couple of things. One is getting autonomous software to understand risk. Maybe because most of us don't really understand it either. But risk is qualitative, it's gray, it's subjective, it requires context, it requires a lot of knowledge about the assets that you're assessing risk on. It has to understand threats and vulnerabilities and likelihood and impact, most of which is voodoo in our business. And so where we've applied AI in the industry, as far as I can tell, only works in marketing. It doesn't actually work in products. Certainly the marketing AI is way better than the tech or product AI. Because risk is tough. And that comes from a couple of problems, or a couple of sort of root causes. One is that in cybersecurity, we actually need AI that is biased. There is a good side and a bad side. And a lot of the discussion around AI and learning models is, well, how do we eliminate bias? How do we treat sexes and religions and ethnicities and countries equally? And that doesn't really work in cybersecurity. So the more we pursue an equal way of interpreting prior activity, the less effective AI becomes in cybersecurity. So unfortunately, this is desperately needed in cyber because, I think most of you would agree that cybersecurity is largely asymmetric, which means $1 worth of offense or problem requires $10 of defense or solution, right? And as problem complexity increases, solution complexity increases exponentially, right? Most of you are probably working with enterprises where there are thousands of people and endpoints and networks, and when you start to stack those things up, it becomes a very complex issue. So we're struggling with a neutral AI that doesn't handle risk well, and really is not addressing asymmetry, which is a major problem. Now, we had really thought about how we fix the talent gap in cybersecurity with AI and bots, but it sounds like no one really wants to get into AI or cybersecurity anymore. I'm seeing trends where people are leaving the industry. I think Paul Robinson mentioned it this morning, and I've seen other articles and statistics that suggest this is just too hard. It's not worth it. I'm gonna go do plumbing or something where you can actually make money. So we are unfortunately in a weird place But I think probably most importantly, the reason that cybersecurity AI is failing or not producing the outcomes that we had originally hoped is that there are two parts to security. First is reality, the reality of security. And the second is how we feel about it. And we've all heard reports and studies that suggest that computers really don't have feelings to them. They don't have emotions. Right? So if you go back to 9/11, and I've heard this example brought up a couple of times today, everyone knows, well, some of you may be a little too young, but pretty much everyone in this room knows exactly where they were the moment the planes hit the towers in New York City. Probably within a square yard, because it changed us, it changed our lives. But that wasn't reality, that was emotion. That was our feelings about security. Now, these are different, and you can be secure even when you don't feel that way. And you can feel secure even when you're not. And they don't always overlap. For autonomous software, for learning software to figure out how we approach cybersecurity, and I would argue most of your customers probably make cybersecurity decisions based on how they feel, not necessarily the data that you've presented to them. If we can't get software to understand emotion and include that in its algorithm, we're going to continue to struggle in cybersecurity because it's not like technology or finance, where it's binary and there's a direct corollary between your investment and your outcomes. In cybersecurity, it's nothing like that. You can spend a ton of money in cybersecurity and not make any progress. And I know a lot of small businesses these days that have done nothing in cybersecurity and have gotten very lucky. Okay, there's a few root causes here. I want to talk about these, and I'm going to start to wrap up. So, how do we identify the risks of autonomous software? They really have very little to do with cybersecurity. They're more of a general issue. The first is bias. Because today, the language models that we leverage to train AI and bots in autonomous software come from existing repositories. Now they are tuned, and we have done some work in this area to treat women equally, or to treat indigenous people equally, or name the party, name the entity. However, when we set autonomous software loose to go learn all of this stuff, the repository of data that it ingests and analyzes and uses to form new decisions is all biased. And that's because we are, as a species, we are opinionated at birth. You are genetically programmed to dislike and like certain things. And whether that's ketchup or mayonnaise, or it's the color of someone's skin. That's part of our DNA. And so this bias has been littered throughout all literature and every decision that we've ever made. Don't forget, a lot of these cognitive biases that we cannot escape are driving our decisions all day long. We are already under this spell of influence from big tech and social media. And so it's making our decisions for us. Misinformation, another big problem. So when I was a kid, if I wanted facts, I went to a library. At some point, we were lucky enough to get encyclopedias, which I read religiously, especially like the anatomy and the maps and stuff. And these were things that we considered facts. Then the internet came along, and it was so convenient, and an amazing place, and it was exploding with all of this information. And at some point, we said, okay, maybe libraries aren't the best way to get information, get facts. Switch to getting all of our information from the internet. If you get all your information from the internet today, I would argue that there's some massive problems in your decision-making process. When my daughter gets old enough to need a source, she's not going to go to the internet. She's going back to the library. Misinformation has caused all sorts of issues. And misinformation tends to lead to influence. Let's talk about the 2016 elections. It was intentional, programmed, predictable, but the data that we relied on to make decisions about our candidates or our country or the other party was all programmed by a computer. All that information that you absorbed to make your decision was created by a computer. At least 60% of it was. So misinformation has become problematic because getting to facts today, it doesn't matter what industry or what domain we're referring to, but getting to facts today is very difficult. Ask yourself right now, how much do you trust Google search results? If it's not basic math or some of the laws of physics, I would argue we all question this now. And it's sort of built into our process, which is, okay, I'm going to hit the internet, I'm going to look for this or that. But when I see the result, I'm going to question immediately. And again, these layers of economics and capitalism, politics, have created yet more complexity around information and the quality of information. Because there's also a risk that someone is intentionally seeding you with bad information. Again, the ultimate goal here used to be money. And now we're seeing it slowly graduate to influence. Because if I can influence you, I can take you there. I can influence you, I can get you to do things. Right? Influence is, I would argue, almost the sole objective for big tech, social media, and geopolitical entities and nation states. They want to control influence. It's important because as a species, we've evolved. I'll tell a little bit of a story around that, but disinformation today is a major issue because we have taken all of these checker-playing software programs and weaponized them. And the data becomes weaponized as well. And we've gotten very good at it. It's very difficult on Facebook to distinguish a legitimate post from someone who's just ranting from a bot. So disinformation, we don't have a good solution for this. There are companies that are attempting to tackle this. It's very, very difficult to distinguish and to avoid this. Another challenge is that autonomous software is like a hammer, right? You have a hammer, you can build a house, or you can kill your neighbor. Nothing wrong with the hammer, it just is what it is. Software is exactly the same thing. Our adversaries have access to the same tools that we do, the same data that we do. They also have access to the underlying infrastructure. So if they want to influence and change our decisions, whether it's the risk of some vulnerability or it's, the sort of political position of some company, they can seed that infrastructure layer, that data layer, so that they don't even need to attack us. They can control our decision. So weaponized software has become a real issue, again, because our adversaries have the same tools. But there are three things that are more seditious, more nefarious than, and bigger risks for us as human beings than those. The first is this. There's no setting today. There's no preferences for AI or the internet. You can't select, I want a nice, kind, friendly internet versus one that's funny, or versus one that is conservative or Democrat. You have no ability to control the input and the stimuli that you absorb. So as autonomous software continues to expand and occupy more and more of our lives, the exhaust or the outputs from these things, you have less and less control of them. Back in the day, you could choose when to run software, or you could provide inputs that would affect the outcomes. But today, there's none of that. Anyone feel like they control the internet today, or the software in your car, or a toaster? You have zero control over anything. That's a huge deal because without control, we can't change it. The next is, it is virtually unavoidable today, already. saw a very cool documentary. It's called Erasing David. It's about 10 years old. And in this documentary, it was a British journalist who was kind of seeing where the internet was headed, hired 2 detectives. And basically the challenge was, if David could disappear for 10 days and not be found by the detectives, he would win, otherwise the detectives would win. So he went as off-grid as he possibly could. He started out, just converting to cash, not using credit cards, not using public transportation, not driving, but it got pretty hardcore. I encourage you to check it out. But today, think about what your life would be like if you had no access to software, or the internet, or data. I would bet that most of you would not survive there. And I mean that quite literally. That might start out being inconvenient in the first hour, but try putting your phone away for the rest of the day. Turn it off. Don't use it. That's just one small element of your life that is completely occupied by autonomous software and technology and data. See how it goes and see what life might be like. Today, it's unavoidable. If you want to travel, communicate, eat, live, heat your house, you are going to interact with ones and zeros. There is no other alternative. It's also impossible to tell the difference. This may be the worst, honestly. And I think back to games when I was a kid. I played Pong. It was 1-bit. It wasn't even 8-bit. Right? And then Minecraft. So fast forward to today, and these games, you cannot tell the difference between reality and a simulation. Anyone ever seen that VR simulation? You put on the goggles and you go up in an elevator and come out of the 23rd floor and you're standing there, paralyzed, looking down. You cannot take a step because it looks and feels that real. I've done it multiple times, and every time I tell myself, it's just, I'm in exactly the same place, but it's unbelievable what we're doing with this technology and this data today. But if we can't distinguish between computer and autonomous software and a human being, where does that leave us in terms of our decision making? And how much do we trust computers right now to replace some of the things that we have gotten from human beings and our species, over the last 250,000 years? But there's also, at our root, an enabler that creates all of this. You look at how human beings make decisions, whether it's cognitive bias, your lizard brain, right instinct, stuff that we've been programmed with for many years, many millennia. Most of it comes down to what we call rewards, limbic system rewards. And when we do certain things or feel certain ways, we have limbic system rewards. There's hormone, there's chemical, anatomical changes in us that make us feel better. Sex is one of them. I'm not going to spend any time on that, but one simple one that everyone kind of understands. The pursuit and the satisfaction of that, there's a reward. And that's because the species has been programmed to procreate, right? That's why we have survived for 250,000 years, is we know how to procreate. And we procreate and we pursue procreation because there are rewards. There's another flaw in our cognitive bias, in our lizard brain, and that is the desire to feel influenced. So not only do we have corporations and countries and entire societies pursuing influence over us through autonomous software and data and the internet, social media, and everything else, but now we compound that with our need to feel influenced. It is programmed in us. These two things combined, I mean, people joke about it, but everyone's seen Terminator, where humans were harvested for energy, right? They're just in these like gelatinous pods hanging out there. There's a cord plug. Everyone's seen The Matrix, right? Where there are people fighting against the simulation. Folks, we're not that far from that. How many years do you think If it took only 40 years to get to photorealistic simulations on a computer, how long do you think it's going to take the next few steps? I don't have the answers, but I'm uncomfortable with it. I can tell you that. Okay, the future of AI. So we need something to help us. We are vastly outnumbered, and we are on defense, generally speaking. And so we are at a disadvantage from the get-go. So things in cybersecurity, from my perspective, are moving too slowly. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some advances, and absolutely. So generally speaking, this term OpenXDR, if you look architecturally at how OpenXDR is engineered and architected, it's vastly different from the SIEM solutions of the past. And in SIEM solutions, we had a problem because too much data in a SIEM would choke it. It would choke ingestion, it would choke performance, it would choke queries, it would essentially slow the system to a point where it wasn't very usable. So we spent a lot of time figuring out which assets am I going to collect telemetry from? How verbose do I want these logs to be? All these nerdy things. With OpenXDR, it's exactly the opposite because it gets smarter, allegedly, and I've seen it work at times. Because it gets smarter, now the goal is the more data, the better. So we've taken a huge leap in technology just by solving the data issue. Now, by pumping in more data from more assets, more of the time, with more information and attributes, we can make better decisions. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of similar advances in cybersecurity today. I mean, I think most of the marketing hype has been around detective tools, not necessarily managing risk, or an important concept, changing security behaviors in human beings. So I feel like it's moving too slowly, which probably leads to some kind of conversation around private equity and turning multiples on these organizations. And how do we make money now? I think there's a lot of money being made in cybersecurity by folks that might not be producing outcomes or real return or value. And as long as that's the case, we will continue to see the current state of change. We also have a problem with adoption, and everyone's heard the Gartner hype cycle and similar things. Everyone kind of go back to like early 2000s. We had essentially already invented the cloud. We didn't call it the cloud. We called it software as a service or applications as a service, things like that. But in the beginning, from a security standpoint, back in 2000, no one was moving to the cloud. If you had any protected, regulated, or sensitive information, intellectual property, whatever, you wouldn't dare put that in the cloud because the cloud is less secure, which was nonsense, right? So people not moving to the cloud in 2000s, they paid a painful price in many ways because they believed that the cloud could not be as secure as a server sitting in a closet in their office building. Now that wasn't true, but it did keep people from adopting the cloud. Today, everyone is pushing everything possible to the cloud because what? It's more secure, which is also nonsense. So now people are making decisions about security and architecture on data or flawed decision making. But it happens every single time. And I think that's what we're going to see with AI, right? There's sort of the first flash of hysteria and hype, which we're kind of in the middle of right now. But eventually, people are going to start to question AI. We're going to see the fissures and the cracks, and the chinks in the armor. We're going to say, hold off. I'm not processing credit cards with autonomous software. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not sharing medical information or health records with autonomous software. It's not secure enough. I'm going to keep it in my EMR. I'm going to keep it where 10 years from now, probably less, everyone is going to be irrationally pushing everything through AI because now, well, it's more secure. So we swing from one extreme to the other, just like we did with the cloud, like we did with every other technological paradigm shift that we've experienced in our careers. Okay, a couple of final thoughts. In cybersecurity, we deal with a diversity issue. AI will solve all of that because at some point, AI will be the other person. It's going to be, well, I don't want to call it the enemy, but whether you're black, white, male, female, Muslim, Christian, all of that stuff goes away when there's an adversary. The adversary becomes autonomous software. The same way you guys felt on 9/11. We were all best friends on 9/12. We were all best friends because we had something much more important to focus our energy and emotion. The same thing's going to happen with AI. With AI and computers and robots, think Terminator, are walking the streets, driving our cars, writing our press releases, conducting risk assessments. We're all going to be best friends. All the dicks in cybersecurity, they go away. We solved that entire problem, including diversity. Like it's a real challenge. I think the future also, we got to change our assumptions. As human beings, we automatically and naturally assume that technology gets better over time. That's not true. Technology has more features over time. It has more capability. The quality of technology actually declines. Used to be, back in my day, if I built a Win32 app, a binary that ran on Windows, and someone opened a window and it was blank and just said 404 error, someone would be questioning my skills. Today, we just hit refresh, refresh, refresh. Think about your phone. How many times have you dropped a call? Right? That capability is vanishing. The ability to make a phone call in this country is vanishing because the system is so complex and we're doing other things over those same channels. Think about the rotary phone. How many of you were lucky enough to use a rotary phone? Every one of you. How many times did you pick up that rotary phone and not get a dial tone? I know the answer. It's 0. It worked every single time. Even if you were
your
dialing
neighbor's
zeros.
calls.
So now usually, if you've seen any of my talks, this is where I sort of shift and talk about all of the good things. I'm not going to do that. Actually, I think it's far worse. This is a personal opinion. I just shared this quote with someone earlier today. But true happiness and the person that you are supposed to be is on the other side of the hardest thing you will ever do. Think about that for a second. Happiness, authentic happiness, comes from working at something really, really hard for a really, really long time and finally overcome it. That's happiness. But today, I live in a world with conveniences that my parents never could have imagined. My parents lived in a world that their parents could never have imagined. And the world gets easier, faster, and more convenient every day. And with it, it drains the happiness because we have nothing left to work really, really, really hard at for a really, really, really long time. One last thought. No, I got 2 last thoughts. There are people on this planet. Anyone know Larry Page? So there are people on this planet that truly believe and have the resources to influence. And they believe that all consciousness should be treated equally. Elon is not one of them. Larry Page is. These guys fight regularly because Larry Page refers to Elon and all of us as a speciesist, meaning we put our species first. There's a new species in town, and it's called AI. And Larry Page wants to treat it exactly the same that humans are treated. The same rights, the same privileges, the same constitution. Think about that. There are highly influential, well-funded, resourced individuals who believe that AI deserve the same place in society as humanity. It's not a joke. When people ask me, am I concerned about AI? And I do have my concerns, but I would argue I'm probably more concerned about the human race not evolving than I am AI evolving. Now I look like I'm judging this individual. I'm sure he's a lovely young man. But if we don't start to ask hard questions and really think critically about whether or not this makes sense for us, at some point you will not be able to turn it off. You will be on a path that will be uncontrollable, unavoidable, and indistinguishable from our current reality. That's my story. Sticking to it. Thank you.